Hi, I'm Matt Moore. I'm a software engineer from Google. A little levity to start off. Prior life, I was a compiler optimization engineer, and I joined Google a couple years ago and did a brief stint on some internal language tooling. After that, I was the founding tech lead for a team working on building on Jenkins at Google. We've built a number of plugins, and we use Jenkins day in, day out for all of our CI/CD, including self-hosting our own stuff however we can. So before we dive in today to the meat of the talk, I wanted to give a quick overview of what we're going to touch on. I'm going to try and get through sections 1 and 2 as quickly as possible so we can get to the everyone's favorite part, the demos. But the first section is quick background on DSLs, what they are, why they're good. Then we're going to talk about this DSL. And then we're going to get into some samples, and we're going to close with some stuff that builds on the multi-branch stuff the CloudBeast folks demoed last year. So first, some of you might be wondering, what the heck is a DSL? DSL stands for a domain-specific language, and Wikipedia defines it as a computer language specialized to a particular application domain. So in this case, right, we're talking about a programming language for Jenkins. Okay, so why would you want to use a DSL with a CI or CD system, right? So version history for your configuration, right? The ability to see who made what changes, roll back when you break things, right? As well as basic code review of your job configuration, right? Portability, right? Say I want to fork a repo and set up my own CI for that setup. Being able to get that up quickly, even for complex setups. Being able to take your setup on a current master, move it to a new one. I even lump into this case the sort of copy-paste getting started experience that other people have with Travis, right? And so I think most importantly, there's this principle of versioning your configuration with your code, right? Which is this really powerful concept that enables a lot of things, and we're going to see examples of this as part of this talk. So Google loves DSLs. When we were getting this Jenkins team started a year or so ago, we talked to a number of teams that through acquisitions and through just odd-shaped software development practices were using Jenkins and not our internal tools. And the single biggest complaint that we heard from them was things of this nature, right? I can't check in my configuration. I can't get the version history. I can't roll back. And internally, for Google's own internal CI/CD systems, everything uses a DSL. So why, right? So at Google, we like to move fast. We like to change how we build and deploy things, and we don't want to live in fear of breaking. We also need to service our active deployments, and we don't want to live in fear of breaking our ability to service those active deployments. So the way Google solved this is, through the use of release branches, and release branches are only as good as your ability to keep building that code. And so in those release branches, we version both our code and the configuration that says how we deploy that code. Now, what that means is you can cherry pick not only fixes to your code, but also to your configuration, right? And so with this assurance that you can continue to build and service your active release, right, this frees developers from this fear of making potentially breaking changes as we move from our current good state to our next good state. So this is not the first Jenkins DSL, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Not even on this list is one that I've seen mentioned in other sessions. I think the keynote, ci.yaml, right? And these have taken a variety of approaches. A number of them have chosen a dialect of Groovy. Some of them have taken such as the literate build stuff, has taken the novel approach of building on top of Markdown as its DSL, and others have simply adapted stuff like Travis's YAML format. So first, I want to say thank you to everyone who's worked in the Jenkins space, the DSL space, right? The work presented today wouldn't be possible without the work of all of the people in this space. But there are some pitfalls, right? You know, in my opinion, Jenkins is its plugin ecosystem, right? And in my experience, most of the other DSL plugins have typically fallen into one of two categories, right? One is that the plugin takes on this knowledge of the other plugins it supports, right? We'll see an example of this in a second. Or in the case of other plugins, they expose their own plugin model, right, that other plugins have to adopt, right, in order to be available in the DSL. The other category is they put that knowledge on the user, and you effectively have to script the Jenkins object model, which is not a very good place to start using a CI or CD system, right? So to pick on one that's sort of a victim of its own success, you know, I see so much check-in mail from this, right? This is a screenshot of the release notes of the Job DSL plugin, you know, where it shows in a 6-week period about adding support for about 7 plugins. The Jenkins plugin community has surpassed 1,000 plugins, and so at that rate, it would take 20 years to add support for the current plugin ecosystem, right? And so I don't think this can keep up with that community, right? So the goals that we sort of put on ourselves before we really put some skin in this game, because clearly DSLs are really important to Googlers, and you know, we desperately wanted to use one ourselves, was working with other plugins out of the box and making adoption trivial, right? This should be a reasonable place to start using Jenkins. So what if? What if there was already a standard language that already worked with all plugins, right? And what if it already exposed exactly the right inputs that every plugin developer wanted exposed to their users, just as the Jenkins UI does? OK, so enough build-up and foreshadowing. How this DSL works. So at a high level, how it works is when you fill out your Jenkins form, you know, freestyle job, matrix job, whatever, right? Jenkins, in the background, is constructing a JSON object, which it calls the structured form submission. And that blob is submitted back to Jenkins when you save. And that JSON object is bound to objects that represent your project eagerly. So the idea is, what if instead of doing that eagerly, you checked it in, right? And when source changes were detected in your repo, you load the JSON that's checked in alongside your code and bind the object lazily and just execute it, right? And then you win, right? You get versioning configuration with your code. So this is a bit of an oversimplification. But first, I wanted to put up this screenshot of the structured form submission page and talk a little bit more about the pieces, right? So on the right here, I've blown up a sample JSON object. This has basically been sliced up from a sample form. It uses divs to figure out, you know, what goes where. But you can see it's got this nice structured layering. And this is how Jenkins slices up a form submission. So if you look on the left-hand side here, this is just a freestyle job. It has 3 steps. Hopefully you can see it. I don't think I can zoom it very well. And when you hit save, it submits the JSON object at the right, which I've pretty printed and scrubbed some of the superfluous stuff out of. But you can see that I've color-coded. The purple box is a shell step. You can see it says echo hello. Middle step's a Maven step. It says I'm running the target's clean package. And the third step is another shell command, which just echoes world, right? So something I want to point out and why I called today's talk unmasking the Jenkins DSL and not, you know, rolling out yet another DSL is because I have in no way chosen this grammar. This grammar has effectively been chosen by the Jenkins plugin community, right? When you choose how to pass your form data back, you're effectively curating your subsection of this grammar, right? So this is the DSL that the community, the plugin community, the core developers, the plugin developers have already defined, right? So, OK. But JSON, it's a little verbose, not to my taste. Lots of curly braces, lots of quotes. Well, there's this nice property of YAML, right? Which is that JSON is a subset of it, right? And you can basically round trip back and forth. If you start with advanced YAML, it'll be a bit lossy, but you get this nice property that you can take the extra verbose JSON and distill it to a simple YAML thing. So if we look at that structured form submission example and convert it to YAML using one of these tools or just by hand, since this is a simple thing, you can see, right, you can write in YAML, and we can turn that back into JSON relatively easily, or start from the JSON and show you what it would look like as YAML. Well, cleaned YAML, because it already is YAML. OK, so we've seen scrubbing an example of structured form submission. Let's now dive into some demos, and I might need 2 hands for this, so bear with me. I'm going to try this again. Can you hear me now? Yeah? OK. So this is an even simpler example than what I showed before, which had 3 build steps. This just has 1, right? So as YAML, right, I've got my set of builders, and in this case, it's a singleton array of a single shell step that echoes hello world, right? And so for the first demo, I'm literally going to take this, paste it into a YAML file, check it into my repo, and we're going to see it in action. OK, so can everyone see this? Is it big enough? Great. OK, so I'm going to open up Jenkins.yaml here. I'm going to paste in our sample. OK, so that's pushing to my little sample repo on GitHub, which is way too zoomed in because the font size changed. OK, so I'm just going to grab the GitHub link here. And I have a little Jenkins running locally. I'm just going to create a new job. And we have this new job type called YAML project. And I'm going to create a hello JUC job. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say sync my Git repo. I've already chosen the magical default YAML file name, but I can customize that. I hit save, and when I hit build now, you can configure it to poll or have post-commit hooks and drill into this. You can see that it's found my YAML file. Sorry, it's a little squashed. It has instantiated that job lazily, and it has echoed hello world here. Can everyone see that? Or I can zoom in a little bit. Yeah. So, OK. So let's switch back to the slides. More demos in store. Don't worry. OK, so that was demo 1. So I know what you might be thinking, because I thought the same thing. This works, but it's not easy, right? I mean, it's not a reasonable place to get started. If you have to know the namespace and class name of the Jenkins objects you want to instantiate, right? And so we've only solved half the problem. But this is YAML. It's not JSON. So we have cool features like tags, right? And so I added the syntactic sugar to the plugin that uses the names that you already use to choose plugins, right? Like execute shell, right? And you can replace the class names with bang by name execute shell, right? And you can basically take this and execute it. So without further ado, our next demos. And again, I'm just going to copy. Hold on, I don't want to do that. So let's get back to the demos. OK, so we're going to open up our YAML file again. I'm going to replace this line. And since this is sort of an invisible change, and to prove I'm actually editing it, I'm going to change the text too, right? And so I'm going to commit that locally. I'm going to push that up. And if I go back to my master, and I now rerun hello JUC, let me make sure it pushed. OK, good. When I run this, because I've changed the project, it's created a new one, right? It'll reuse the same one if you push the same DSL. But if you change the DSL, it actually instantiates a new project for you. And that gives you not just your source history of the jobs, but also, you can view them in the Jenkins UI if you want to. And one of the reasons for this we'll see in a few minutes is that, or in just a second, is that you can actually change the project types, right? So you can see here that even by using by name and not the class name, right? I have now echoed hello JUC, right? So no special knowledge required. Everything that's visible through the Jenkins UI now, you can use to start using this DSL. But the next question is, OK, I want to use another plugin, right? Say, for instance, I want to write a matrix job. I don't know the syntax for it. So to solve this problem, we basically turned Jenkins UI into an IDE of sorts. So I'm going to create a matrix job exactly how I would usually do it. Sorry, matrix multi-configuration project is what the UI calls it. So I'm going to create a multi-configuration project. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to add an access and call it foo. I'm going to add values bar and baz. And now I'm going to add a shell step that says echo foo, right? And I'm going to hit save, right? Create matrix project exactly how you're used to, right? OK, so how does that help me with the DSL? Well, as I said, we're submitting the JSON, right? So we actually listen for that. And we scrub it, and we attach it to the project so that you can see exactly the YAML you would need in order to create that same job with the DSL. Now, because Jenkins submits a lot of form data, we tried to scrub this down, but there's a lot of default values that are passed in that we can't just blindly throw out. So there is some superfluous stuff in here. But we can scrub some of that out. So for the next part of the demo, we're basically just going to take this. I'm going to paste it in. I'll scrub it a little bit to show you how reduced you can get this. Right, so now I have a matrix built, right? I'm going to reorder it to, I like to have the kinds first. A little OCD, I'm sorry. OK, so another thing you'll notice here, in addition to some of the superfluous stuff that I scrubbed out, right, is there's also this really terse bang matrix syntax, right? And so while we don't want to require other plugins to have knowledge of us, if you choose to, right, you can actually annotate your plugin with @YAML tag matrix, and we'll give you a nice short name. Right? We built in a few because we don't want the core to depend on this. But for some common plugins, we've added some nice terse things. So you can see here, matrix, shell. We have a freestyle one. I didn't need that before because we actually default to freestyle because it's so common. But so I'm going to take this, and I'm going to check it in. And we're going to see, through the magic of versioning my config with my code, switching my integration test from a freestyle build to a matrix build. So let me push that. OK, and so if I go back to our hello JUC one more time, and I run that, this is going to instantiate a third project, which if I click into it, you can see it's running bar and baz here in a brand new matrix build, right? And I didn't have to have any special knowledge of Jenkins. I just created it through the UI exactly how I'm used to. Took the DSL that it told me. I cut out some extra stuff. And I checked it in. And now I'm running something completely different. OK, so let's see. Back to the slides. So OK, so that was demos 2 and 3. One more. So quick recap. So you can create jobs the way you're used to. Or if you choose, you can start from one of the samples that we have, which I'll put up and where to find them in just a second. You can then take the existing project and convert to YAML if you so choose. And if you start from YAML, you can learn to use new plugins just by going into the UI, configuring the plugin the way you want to, and then looking at the bits of YAML that it's using and bringing that into your DSL. As your configuration grows and you start to use more plugins, right, you may also have a growing development team, right? And you may grow from having one branch to many branches. So enter the multi-branch plugin, which I'm a big fan of, and a lot of, this is built on top of it. So before we get into multi-branch, the YAML project plugin repo has a samples directory. This will grow. It has, a few really common examples now, but there's some Maven stuff in here using, I think there's some using Cobertura and some other common plugins. But you can check that out. And we will continue to add things to this as we grow. OK, so the multi-branch support. So quick survey. I know a number of people have asked this before. How many people in here use Git or Mercurial? That's almost everyone. OK, so among you, who uses branches? Feature branches, bug branches, release branches? OK, good portion, right? So multi-branch projects, right? So this is an offshoot of the literate build work done by CloudBees. It was part of the keynote last Jenkins user conference. I think it was one of the coolest demos at the last Jenkins user conference, and I was excited enough about it that built this on top of it, right? So this is a pretty common Git workflow. A lot of people have alternative workflows like this, right, where you have a lot of branches, right? I have feature branches. I have potentially many feature branches. I may have a develop branch. I may have release branches. I may have multiple release branches. I may have hotfix branches, right? Who uses a model like this? Git flow. OK, a few people. OK, so our team's Jenkins setup, we had a number of feature and developer branches, and we ran heavy testing on them before we merged to master. And in the days before the DSL and the multi-branch plugin, we basically had a common configuration for all these jobs. And this was painful, because what it meant is if we wanted to make a configuration change, a breaking configuration change, say to add integration testing for a feature that only existed in a feature branch, because we wanted to test that feature through the integration testing before we checked it into master, we'd have to break everyone on our team, or we'd have to check it in untested, right? Either or. And that was a pain, right? There was no tracking of, who made changes to the common configuration of the UI. And if you made a breaking change, there's no natural rollback path, because there's no history. It got to the point where when we were upgrading some of our components and editing configurations, I would snapshot the persistent disk we were hosting our master on before we started, so I'd be able to roll back. So now, we have our config versioned with our code. And I would say we have twice the number of feature branches and less than 10% of the configuration on the actual Jenkins master. I think I could recreate our core CI job in a few keystrokes, probably a couple more than you saw in the previous demo. So, OK, without further ado, demo 4. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a branch of our little demo here. I'm going to switch onto it. And I'm going to go in here and take our matrix job, and I'm going to say, add a leg to my matrix job for my new Jenkins user conference feature, right? And I can let's see. So I can check that I'm on the feature branch. Yeah, so I'm on the Matt Moore feature branch. Jenkins YAML has that diff. I'm going to commit it. OK, and so now I'm going to come back over to my Jenkins master, and I'm going to create a multi-branch job. You may have seen it in the list before. And I'm going to do more or less the same set of work I did a second ago to set this job up. I'm going to add a Git source and paste in my GitHub link. So now when I hit save, the multi-branch plugin runs branch indexing. You can see it running there. It's going to discover my 2 branches and create projects for them. If I drill into the map more project and look at the standard out, you can see it's running my JUC feature, the extra matrix flag for my JUC feature, which is only in my branch. Now, if I go back and I drill into my master branch, you can see it's still just running those 2 legs, right? And so I have successfully versioned my configuration with my code. I can now change my Jenkins job configuration in my branch using potentially new plugins, right? And that's scoped to my change until I've vetted it. And as my code merges from my branch to master, the configuration in master changes. And then as people merge that into their branches, their CI picks it up and they start running it. OK. So I scrolled back. OK, so that was the 4th final demo. How am I on time? I'm good? OK. And so now you can start to apply these same concepts in a more advanced multi-branch setting, right? So in addition to running a multi-branch project across all branches, I can start to filter it, right? I can start to say things like, on all branches under features/star, I want to run the features YAML DSL, right? When it merges to master, I want to run the master YAML, right? And when I snap a release branch, I want to run releases YAML, right? And so right now, I think the filtering functionality is in an experimental version of the Git plugin, but it works, right? And we use this in our self-hosting today. So shameless plug, if you want to get involved and help us fix issues or find issues and tell us about them, please do. We are starting to track these under the Jira component YAML project. And we have a few that we are aware of. And a thank you to the sponsors, right? This would not have been possible without them putting us up here in this nice hotel. OK, so I'll be up here if you want to come up and chat with me. But thanks for taking the time to hear me out.